Reminder to sign in if you haven't signed in already, and we'll kick things off in 1 minute. Feel free to keep adding things to the agenda if there are things you want to talk about. All right, first thing on the list is introductions and new faces. I don't see any new people here, so I'll move on to the next one. Standing item, release planning and updates. Usually Emily or Javier.
We did have a patch release go out last week for PAC. This is to fix an issue in a very specific case where the lifecycle image was not being used for an untrusted builder. So a slight security concern there, but has been fixed since found.
Any other release planning updates?
I was wondering if we should cut a lifecycle patch. We got a contribution from Lucas that fixes an issue where if you're using a cache image as your cache destination and your cache image is identical between builds, we delete it. And we have the fix in there. So I was thinking about cutting a patch for that, if that suited everybody.
Would that include other changes or simply be cherry picked into a release?
The only thing that's gone on to master since the last release.
Cool.
All right, next thing on the list is outstanding RFCs. I will share my screen and run through these really quickly. I'm skipping over the ones that are already on the agenda and or drafts. Everybody see my screen? Find the Zoom. Yep, hold on. Okay. So first thing on the list is inline build packs. I think this is on the agenda for today, so I'm going to skip over it. Yeah. Read-write platform volume mount.
I think that was also on the agenda.
Yeah, this was listed in future topics and I moved it down. Are people still asking for it?
Asking for?
To discuss it, like the person who put it in future topics the other day that I moved down. No, maybe not. I don't know. I've dropped this. I'll catch up with it today.
Cool.
Find out where we are.
Okay, you're putting it on the agenda for today?
I am taking it off the agenda since I didn't want to talk about it. Someone put it in future topics and it never got talked about. So.
Got it. But there's no action right now. Still, just lots of discussion going on.
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Last type arguments on the agenda.
Cool. Increase build plan flexibility. This is final comment period. Is this through?
It almost certainly will be. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, I think it's done. Danielle made a comment, and I actually just did the change that we should point to the Node Engine build pack in your reference link and not the Procfile one.
Yep, will do.
Cool. Offline build packages, RFC. I don't see Forrest or Dan here for this one. I think they were going to, last time I talked to Dan, they were going to clarify some things about like the digest does really stay the same. It's just a different it's just the digest of the build pack layer. So there's some confusion they mentioned from the last working group meeting where I wasn't there. And they're going to keep making changes to it. It's not on the agenda for this time. I think they may plan to talk about it tomorrow.
I feel like one of my questions about the digest, and we can talk about it tomorrow, is how an online and an offline build pack with of the same version and ID can live in the registry because they will have different image digests. That's sort of what I meant with that digest question. So hopefully we can talk about that tomorrow.
Sounds good. They just works, I think, but what that means is we should discuss. Pack image pull policy.
I need to break this up into 2 RFCs as my action item. Haven't gotten around to that.
Cool. Stack metadata. This hasn't had any progress for a while. Are there outstanding actions? They're like requested changes. Does this need to go to FCP?
Stack metadata. I'll take a look, and since there are a fair number of mine, I'll resolve the ones that I think are resolved, but I don't think that's actually ready to go to FCP. I think there is still outstanding stuff.
Cool. Sounds good. Next on the list is add root Buildpacks interface. We're talking about this one today. Register a build pack with pack. Is that on the agenda?
No, I think we're just waiting for Steven's vote, so we can actually move it to FCP if we want.
I already approve of this one. I've already looked at it. I just haven't had my approval yet.
Great.
So if you're just waiting for me, I'll add it.
Yeah, I think my only outstanding, I approved it, but the only outstanding thing was probably just adding the label stuff in.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
It's a draft. Image exposes metadata for layers that participated in images build. This is Paul Alvarez's thing. He was going to rethink how we don't want to include stuff about the build layers in the final image because it breaks reproducibility. I don't know if he's made any progress. Emily, were you going to reach out to him? That's what I recall.
I chatted with him a little bit on Slack about Report Toml. I think he might be working on that somewhere.
Cool. I'll leave it open for now. And then app image extensions, obviously, it'll be solved by root Buildpacks and probably closed if we, you know.
I was going to ask that. Can we make that explicit? Like,
Sure.
just because I saw it was listed as an alternative in the root build packs. I wasn't sure, like, if we're playing them against each other, you're in agreement that you would want, like, you think root build packs is. Okay.
Yep, I just want to get to consensus in the root Buildpack thing first before I close this one. All right, any other RFC related things? Next thing on the list is Git branch renaming.
That'll be me. There has been some expression of a desire throughout myriad development communities to stop using master as the default branch in Git repos due to its racial connotations. We've had a discussion inside the leadership team that we are going to do that for the repos controlled by the Buildpacks organization. This is sort of supported by the fact that GitHub has come out and said that they're in the process now of making it so that master won't be the default when new repos are created. And from my own personal side, the Spring team has committed to a very large effort to change every single repo in sort of the Spring ecosystem as well. And I think that's, sort of indication enough that there's the process of a widespread conversion of this. We're going to change it from master to main and take on the responsibility of making sure that, all of our CI gets fixed up and stuff like that. And so that's more an announcement than anything else. Beware, this is coming.
There
Do we
was
need to
also
send an email to the mailing list as well?
We can do that as the process changes. Or
Yeah,
sorry, as
I'll-
we are in the process of changing it.
Yeah, I'll draft some comms for like email, Twitter, and stuff, and then we can review on the core team.
there was also a related PR by I think by Simon who's on the call about changing from whitelist and blacklist to what did you use in the end? It was allow list and block list.
No, we started with allow list and block list. Block list is complicated because it could be a list of blocks. We ended up on include list and exclude list because it wasn't quite doing the same thing as allowing and denying.
Okay.
That's merged in already. So
Nice.
Oh, that's merged in already, you said?
it's merged into lifecycle.
Okay. Can you put the PR link somewhere so I can find it, just so I can reference it in my email and stuff?
Yep. I'll put in the agenda.
Thanks.
Does that
It makes you feel any
That
better.
doesn't break anything, right?
What was the question, Terrence?
That doesn't break anything, does it?
No, it's just renaming classes and variables in the lifecycle.
Yeah, this was not any part of our public interface. This was just internally named methods and variables.
The Spring community has also been grappling with the allow list, particularly. The pedants over there really don't like that it's not an English word. But I think they ended up going, I think the way it's come down now is they're going to go with allow list because there is a broad enough swell in the rest of the community. But for internal stuff like this, I don't think it matters at all.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even spell my variable names correctly, so I'm less worried about consistency.
Okay, we can move on.
Next on the list is launcher RFC changes. Number 84.
Emily's still typing, but she'll be the one.
On Thursday, for those of you who didn't make the Thursday working group, we discussed making changes to the launcher argument RFC so that instead of using C and B process type environment variable to select which process type we're running, we're going to make launcher a multi-call binary and create symlinks for the different process types. So you can actually just put your process type in the entry point as a way of configuring what process type you're using, or put launcher itself in the entry point. And that means don't launch a process type, launch a custom command. I've updated this RFC just today, so it's ready for everyone to take a look.
One thing I liked about it's not the original RFC, but the RFC in between this version of it and the last version of it.
Maybe we should just close and open different ones
One-
instead of being in place.
RFC 1.3 or something, is that it got rid of the assumption that everything should be that when you're passing arguments to the command, by default it's running in a shell, right? They'll let Buildpacks opt in or out to shell parsing for their command. Does this new change preserve that?
Even the last version of this RFC still used the two dashes to signify direct versus shell parsing. So you never had to explicitly say bash. What changed in the shell parsing argument, which could be broken out separately because it's independent of sort of the launcher resolution change, is how we execute in bash a process when you're given, when there are multiple values in the image command, right? So we used to run bash dash C, and then the first argument was the script, and subsequent arguments were arguments to bash. So you would have had to do some complicated and kind of hard logic to be able to use subsequent arguments in your script. Now we generate a script from all of the arguments using some eval cleverness to preserve tokenization and to do shell parsing correctly after the profile scripts have been sourced. But you don't need to explicitly say bash.
So I don't know if I got lost in all that. Is there a way that you could give like a high level overview of the RFC as like the new version that exists right now?
Just the difference from the previous version.
Well, I
Emily, did
guess
you-
I care more
did
from
you-
the UX, like how it would work, right?
Yeah, like
did
start from first principles, kind of, right? Like if we should be able to explain this to our users pretty succinctly. So like just that, not knowing any of the other previous RFCs.
Yeah, did you include the examples you sent to me in Slack the other day?
I updated the examples that were already in there to do the new usage because I was rushing to get it done before this working group, but I can do some reorganization.
Yeah, you talk a little bit, and then I'll put the examples on a sheet that we can look at real quick.
Yeah. The philosophy is to make CNB images behave in a way that is intuitive and similar to other OCI images. So for many, I would say most images that run an app, the command that actually runs the app is set in the entry point. And the command field in the OCI image provides additional arguments to the app. So this is changing our default behavior to be similar to that. Now, there's a complicating factor in that we need the launcher itself to be an entry point. In the ideal world, we would like to specify the launcher and the process type in the entry point, but that gets unwieldy with Docker run. So the clever solution is to make symlinks named after each process type that point at the launcher, and then we can use the 0th argument inside the launcher to determine which process type we're running. So you can do Docker run -- entry point web image and then provide arguments to it after that. So you can toggle between process types using the entry point. And if your entry point is just the launcher, or basically anything that doesn't match a process type, then you're launching a custom command.
And if you're talking,
Can't hear you,
can't
Dan.
hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I can't tell you how happy I am about this. I think this is actually a really, really good outcome, specifically that we go back to using entry point, something that every single Docker user is familiar with or is a standard Docker way of doing what we want to do, rather than the CNB process type. I think that's a bigger win than even putting arguments in.
Yeah, I don't agree, actually. I think that the expected Docker thing would be to have launcher as the entry point sort of always. And I think that the process type should be an argument to launcher. But I also think that that third case there is a huge improvement over the previous proposal. So I'm not going to end up asking for changes, but I do still disagree.
I think this accounts for both scenarios though, right? Because for
No, I think it's a great compromise, but what I was saying is sort of like actually that idealistically, I think the right thing for Docker is that entry point is always launcher and the process type name is an argument to launcher. But it's fine.
doesn't this allow you to, when the entry point is launcher, isn't the process type name, can't the process type name be specified as an argument? Does that not work
No.
in this proposal?
We can make it work.
No,
That was a suggestion I made before. I think gets into interesting. If
we end up in like the exact same problem we had with like my first proposal. We're trying to disambiguate between the first argument being a command versus a process type.
I really like the usage of being able to put my process type in the entry point. And I like that when I'm running a process type, the default interpretation of subsequent things are args. I am okay letting a process type be an argument to the launcher if you're not using the multi-call functionality. I think the downside of that is ambiguity, because we could avoid ambiguity if we take the path to the symlinks off the path before the launcher launches a custom command. You can actually get behavior that doesn't have conflicts in it. But in the trade-off between preserving process type arguments if people like it versus conflicts, I'm okay compromising on that.
Now that you've opened up this additional place for information, right, being able to configure, use the entry points, you know, the, what do you call it, argv0 of the entry point in order to do the switch. I think we can account for all of these use cases because we have that extra dimension. So you could have a special process type name, for instance, that when you symlink the launcher to that, it does take the the first argument to the thing as a process type instead of an override command, right? Like I like that this opens extensibility so that if we wanted to do things like that in the future, we now have a switch to be able to add additional behaviors.
Like technically a build pack could add that, right? Like add that process type, which then delegates over to the launcher or does additional, I guess, computation to determine what the actual execution should be.
Yeah, there's like a lot of room for extensibility.
Yeah,
right? You could totally,
Yeah, I mean, that's not the thing that concerns me, though. Like, well, for one, I don't want my build packs writing a bash process type. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it's also like, it goes beyond that too. Like, I want people to, reference their custom process types or whatever. But I mean, like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. It's a good compromise. I just, like, my thing is like, I don't see how it's less ambiguous when the process type name is not an argument to launcher. To me, that feels like very ambiguous. When you're like, when the only arguments to launcher are -- spring profiles and stuff like that, to me, that's kind of weird. But again, like, this is fine. I'm happy to move forward with it.
I do have some questions, or a question for case 6. That bash right there, is that a process type or is that actually the executable?
That's actually the executable. So the difference between like case 4 and case 6 is that in case 4, the launcher is setting up your environment for you. And sometimes that's the bash shell you want to be in. You want to be in the shell that looks like what it would look like when you executed your process. But other times you just want to directly bash into the container and you don't want the launcher, and that's case 6. And that always works regardless of what we do to the launcher, because that just means like, don't do the CMB thing. I know what I'm doing.
Doesn't this mean we have to add all the process types to path somehow?
Yeah, I was going to ask that as my follow-up.
And
Yeah.
in that case, what's the order of precedence for, like, that? It seems like it could be, I mean, it's better than what we had before for the overriding. It's a little, it worries me less, but adding all the process types to path for the whole execution of the container seems like it could lead to really unintentional behavior later when someone chooses a common process type name and your app, like, here's a really common one. You have a web app. You called your main process web, right? Now, web doesn't actually, when you run your app, web isn't going to be the process that's executed when you run web. It's going to run the launcher and then do something else. So I'd kind of like that to be a fixed path.
We put the, like, we could require it to be an absolute path. I'm open to that. My suggestion was going to be, we put them all in a place like CNB process. In the exported image, we prepend it to the path. But when you run the launcher, we scrub it from the path before we execute other things.
That's pretty good. Scrubbing it from the path makes me feel a lot more comfortable. It still have some reservations, but I would not block that from happening if that's the way we want to go. I had some questions about more about the argument parsing. So when you do, like in, let's say, case 3, when you're passing that spring profiles thing, what I really liked about the 1.3 of this RFC was that each argument you pass gets fed directly into the the process that's running as argv1, argv2, and there's no glommed shell parsing. Like if you tried to put symbols in there like at, right, those would not get interpreted by a shell, along contextually along with the other things, and then it's very direct, if that makes sense. And then in direct mode is just reserved for, hey, I want to skip the profile, stuff. I'm not sure I understand how that works in this latest version.
First of all, this isn't any different than the previous version.
Cool.
So the thing you imagined was in that middle version wasn't there. This is the same. But what it does is it guarantees you a behavior that looks like that. It guarantees that it has the same behavior it would if you just executed those arguments in bash in the container after the profile scripts were sourced. It does a little bit of magic to get there by adding all of the arguments as arguments to the first wrapping bash, which then get added as arguments to the second bash, which then get interpolated into a command that evals them in double quotes. And like, it looks a little complicated how it works, but the behavior is very intuitive. So I guess is the question, do you want people to have to specify, do you want to remove the meaning of dash dash for direct and not direct?
No, not about direct mode. I want more information on the magic, if that makes sense. Are we still?
I can show you the code.
Yeah,
Also, in the RFC itself, it sort of shows what it does if we open that up.
I have a question that might be the same thing. If instead of MySQL in that example, I wanted to put an environment variable or a reference to an environment variable that exists in the container but does not exist locally outside of where I'm running Docker. Can I do that?
I tested that. Yeah.
Okay.
You have to single quote it in this Docker run command, because otherwise your bash will interpolate it. As long as you do that, it gets evaluated in the right place.
But that argument together, the individual argument is evaluated independently. Like each of the arguments are evaluated separately, right? They're not evaluated together, and then we do some kind of string munging to pull them apart, right? We preserve the positionality, the independence of each of the arguments. Or
Why don't we let Ben just scroll down to the how it works
I found
section?
the typo, Emily.
Yeah. I was rushing to get it up before the working group because my internet died this
here
morning.
it is.
Please don't
Yep.
judge me.
Yeah. There you go.
It does this madness, but it behaves the way you want it to.
Got it. Okay, this is like what we discussed before, right?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, yes.
But you were saying the user would have to say --c, and that's not true. But everything, the tokenization and shell parsing work the way you want them to work.
In order to use at, right, and then put a totally other command over there, the user would have to specify bash c and then do a more complex thing. They couldn't use arbitrary shell logic and shell primitives to create a complex command inside of command. You got to specify the command and the arguments independently. And if you want to do something more fancy, introduce more complex logic, you have to bash dash c, and then you can pass all of that as an argument to bash, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Just making sure that that behavior was preserved.
The other thing that I left in the RFC is that if there's only one argument, we don't do this magic. It does exactly what it does now, because you don't lose anything by doing that, by just making that the script directly, and you don't gain anything by doing this magic if all you have is a command to begin with anyways.
I'm not sure I followed that last point. Could you repeat that?
It preserves backwards compatibility. So it basically means if someone wrote a process where the command itself had everything in it with no args, but there's a whole script in the single string in command it behaves exactly the way it does now.
Okay, but we're not talking about preserving the functionality where if you specify web without changing the entry point.
We're talking about the Buildpack API change here, not the
Okay,
API change.
cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I think that makes sense because it allows for seamless migration and it works well in all cases.
So you also evaluate the command parameter, but you don't evaluate it to something that's going to get passed to something later. You just ensure that the command parameter is executed in the context of bash and that the arguments are provided to it after being independently evaluated, which if that thing is just one binary, then the rest of the things get passed to it, it works out. And if that thing is a script and the rest of the things get passed to it, that also works out. Something like that. I don't understand how you could achieve the backwards compatibility and the new behavior, because like bash -c and then the binary name followed by the arguments, those arguments aren't actually going to get passed to the binary name. They'll just be ignored because it'll be a little script inside there.
That's why it's only preserved if there are no arguments. So if your process defines an argument or a user defines an argument, you get the new execution flow. If there are no arguments, you get the old execution flow. So everything that works now will continue to work. Arguments will break those processes, but those processes already can't take arguments.
Do you plan to deprecate the behavior where you just shove everything in command eventually?
I would like to do that eventually, yes.
You said it would still work? Is that what you said?
It will work exactly like it does now, unless you add an argument, and then it won't work. And it's already impossible to pass an argument to one of these things correctly because of the way the parsing happens. So you haven't lost any functionality there.
So if I don't pass any arguments and just pass bash, it will just work.
To clarify, we're talking about the Buildpack API, not the platform, so not the Docker run aspect of it.
Yeah, we're not talking about the launcher's interpretation of arguments. We're talking about how a process type gets executed. I wanted to not break every process type that exists currently. I think we can do that safely.
I like it.
Don't like it, but I'll accept it. I think we're going to need documentation. Like, I think the thing that no one understands entry point and CMD, and Kubernetes makes it even harder to understand. So it will confuse people. I think it's like, again, like a lot better than the previous version of this RFC, but yeah.
Anything else on this? Maybe we should move on to the next one. So now we got root Buildpacks next. It's probably also going to be a longer one. All right, moving on to root Buildpacks.
Yeah, we can spend time on it or not. I just want to make sure that everyone who cared had seen the comment I added, trying to summarize what we discussed last week. We had a little breakout session. I'm trying to find it. And where is it? Yeah, there were a few things that came out of that. One is that we established that in order to use a root Buildpack, it must be essentially provided by the stack. So stack maintainers can choose to include root Buildpacks that they would support. So a stack provider might include a builder or whatever that has an apt Buildpack, and then you could use that as part of your project toml or whatever.
Really mean provided by the builder, right? Not the stack.
Yeah, it's really the builder, right? But it doesn't have to be in the order. It could just be, it can be in the order, but it doesn't have to be in the order. But those are the only root Buildpacks that you could, that you can include in your build.buildpacks of project toml. And then the part, I think I'm a little fuzzy on this still, but the run image also needs the root build packs, but we're going to do some magic so that they're like wiped from the final app image, even if they're in the run image. I think that's the right way to describe it. And then build packages can only contain root or non-root build packs. Was I off with any of that?
That sounds really good to me.
I find the stack restriction a little befuddling. What does that actually mean even in the pack case? So the builder creators will add any necessary stack build packs or root build packs. And then the real restriction to the pack is just you can't provide it on the like -B.
Yeah, you're limited. Like you can't use arbitrary build packs, root build packs, without somehow adding it to the builder. So in this comment that I can probably link to or whatever, but I'm saying the thing that I still want to figure out before we move forward is like the UX around extending the builder so that you can add the whatever root build packs you want. I want to make that easier if possible.
Seems like that's just lack of a stack restriction.
So I'm trying to understand, I might be on McNew's side here, because in some of the comments that we've talked about, we're trying to figure out what the need for something like the upgrade operation is. And I'm wondering if this restriction is being put in place just to avoid those same concerns there. Because if you think about how pack itself currently works, when you pass in an additional build pack, it creates an ephemeral builder, right? So in this case, for these root build packs, are we just putting in an arbitrary limitation? Because otherwise we should be able to still create that ephemeral builder and add root build packs.
I think the main restriction is just that a build pack author can't like throw a bunch of distribute a build package that has a bunch of root build packs that slow everything down, right? Or like we don't end up shifting the community over to everything is a root build pack and all builds are very slow, right? That the primary way people use build packs is through the build pack interface and not by doing whatever they want, right? I assume that like you'd be able to pass a root build pack with -- build pack, or it even says here like a mechanism that would extend on the fly if root build pack is specified in build.buildpacks. I don't think there's opposition to that. It's just at least to start making sure that root build packs are about, a sort of stack level functionality in, these type of users on this platform can install Ubuntu packages, right? And that can be very seamless. That could happen automatically when a build pack requests, packages via the build plan interface. I think one thing I don't see called out here is we talked about using the build plan interface in mix-ins so that either a stack could provide mix-ins or a build package could provide mix-ins. And on larger stacks, the build package can do less work to kind of help play down some of the performance issues. But the only restriction is that like we can't make it so all build packages everywhere have an apt root build pack in them and install packages, because then at that point you might as well throw the whole thing out and do just stage Docker files, right?
So it's not a technical limitation or concern. It's more an opinion that we're trying to enforce. Is that right?
Well, I think there are also some issues with root build packs and the run image, where if we have the dynamic, I'm not sure, Emily, you had some thoughts about dynamically adding root build packages to the run image and that being much harder than having them pre-baked into a builder like run image. That's one thing we talked about.
Especially on other platforms, right? Like, correct me if I'm wrong, McNew, but I feel like it'd be very hard for KPack to have a builder that had root build packs and then execute the flow as it's described in this RFC, because you need an image that has is at its base the run image, has root build packs on it, and has some sort of root build pack runner lifecycle phase in order to generate the run layers that you want on your final image. And not every platform can dynamically make an image on the fly. Like, it'd be very hard in Tecton as well. So the idea is crate builder, if you have root build packs, can spit out 2 images. And then when you finally export, what you're using as your base image is the run image minus the extra special layers that we added.
Yeah, I'd like to talk through, like, actually concretely talk through what that flow is going to be. I don't know if that was, what was at the session last week that I missed? Because it's still a little unclear to me exactly what that flow looks like. We can do image creation that in KPAC that Tecton obviously can't.
I think Tecton was the example we had last time of why it might be good to stick to the ability to do a build, like just a basic build in all cases with fixed images. Right, go ahead.
You'll still, so then I guess we could talk through that case, but to me that doesn't require the stack restriction. Like, I think that seems separate to me, because in the case where you're just executing like it locally with doing -b from it not being a stack, you're going to be using the pack platform. You can create that ephemeral builder and those ephemeral run image builders, for lack of a better term. But you're not going to be doing that on Tecton. So even on Tecton, you could be using the builder built with the root images inside them.
I think the stack restriction, like, might need a better word for it. If I'm understanding correctly, and maybe I'm interpreting this differently than Joe is, the point is just that people can't ship meta build packs with root build packs in them, because then they will proliferate. Like, you have to be a little bit more deliberate about how you add them.
So that's
Yeah,
just
is that really all it is? I thought there was more to it, that like that we felt that the build pack had to be included in the stack images so that, for example, the upgrade would work without needing the builder available.
The upgrade, the root build pack, for the upgrade to work, the root build pack needs to be included in the run image, or needs to be in the, I don't think we want to include it in the application image itself, right? And so the run image you're rebasing against has to include the root build pack, which means that it has to kind of be baked on initially, right? It can't be something that's dynamically provided. We don't want someone to have to dynamically provide it at rebase. And so any kind of dynamic adding of the root build pack would have to be dynamic and create a new, like, yeah, I think that's also part of it, right? So
what's the
reason.
value? Sorry, what's the value of the upgrade operation? So for context, we have rebase, which is just the OS layers of the stack image, and then we have rebuild, which is adding the build pack provided dependency layers and the application layers. What's the upgrade buying us?
You can't do a rebase if you modified the base stack. Rebase stops working because the run images don't have those packages, and you can't swap layers across you made arbitrary changes boundary, right? We can only do what we do because the layers the build packs creates have this contract that they only go in empty directories. They don't modify existing things. So rebase isn't a safe operation on those images. So you have to extend the original image with the root build pack again, and then you can do the rebase afterwards. And that's the operation we're calling upgrade that would replace rebase. It would just do a rebase. You could just very safely only run upgrade ever. And in cases where its rebase is appropriate, it does rebase. In cases where it needs to do more than a rebase, it needs to re-extend the run image using the root build pack. It would do that first and then reapply.
Can I get a concrete example of what that would look like? What exactly would break in a concrete example if, for instance, I have a OS stack image that has something installed in it, and you're saying the root build pack could either delete or add additional packages, right? You're saying that I can't swap the lower base layers anymore because that
Correct.
breaks the ABI compatibility that we had prior?
No, it's not even ABI compatibility. It's much worse than that. It's like imagine, I'll give you like a really concrete example. Imagine you install a package that adds a user to Etsy password, right? And then later, the run image gets a security patch that changes that, removes a password that was accidentally added to a user or something in the base image, right? Or makes another change to Etsy password to improve its security posture. When you do the rebase, you lose the lower changes, and you don't have, you lose modifications to the new thing.
Yeah, it
You
won't
just
like
get,
merge.
there's right. Rebase, it does not do a merge, and so it's only the reason that only we and Jib and Co use this technique of being able to rebase layers is because we've been strict about contractuality of the layers we generate, and so the rebase operation becomes a more complex operation when you talk about installing Ubuntu packages, and there are all these technical limitations that apply. And so the reason to restrict root build packs to the stack is kind of technical things around dynamic image generation being difficult on some platforms, around upgrade needing to continue to work in a way that's not complicated, and not wanting to proliferate not wanting to get rid of all the work we did to build the Buildpack API and just have everybody write root build packs all the time. They don't have the same sort of performance and metadata benefits.
Rather than trying to restrict people from getting themselves into this unperformant situation in more artificial ways, maybe the clearest way to do this is just not to provide an upgrade operation and refuse to rebase images that have had root build packs run on them.
I think the upgrade operation is valuable. Oftentimes the person who cares about that the upgrades work is not the person that is building the application.
Yeah, I feel like if we have to choose between custom packages and rebase, it just feels like we really failed at somewhere. You know what I mean?
I also feel like many people pick custom packages.
Yeah.
Because one is I need it to run my app. The other is, I guess, performance is nice.
Yeah, and then they're just, I think it's really hard to argue why to use it over Dockerfile if you lose rebase. There's definitely other advantages, but it's harder.
I don't think it's necessarily even safe, right, if arbitrary root build packs are running to perform the upgrade operation.
We talked about this a little bit. It's it's safe as long as the root build packs are safe, which is another reason that it's nice that if they come with the builder, if they're approved by the builder author as this will only make ABI compatible changes, then it is safe, right? And so if we make those restrictions, then we absolutely can have our cake and eat it too.
But anyone can be creating a root build pack, so you really can't manage that guarantee.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a point where Steven and I kind of start to part ways in that I'm kind of okay with people having a foot gun where they use a root build pack and then break ABI compatibility and rebase does something, but the final image doesn't work or whatever. And I think, Steven, you're saying that you don't want to give them that foot gun.
I'm okay with that foot gun as long as there's control, as long as the decision to use the root build pack that's not ABI compatible is an explicit decision on the part of the user and not an explicit decision on the part of somebody else that they don't know about, if that makes sense.
Right, so the build packages can only contain root or non-root addresses that, right?
It does. For me, that addresses that completely. But the needing to come on the stack, built when you build a builder, there's a run builder and a build builder, like we kind of talked about before, so that rebasing is preserved, right? That we can keep doing those operations. The technical limitations put the additional restriction of, it's going to be tricky to make it so you can dynamically select root build packs immediately at build time without a lot of additional images being generated. but happy to make it so you can extend the builder to include additional root build packs if you need to, right? Which is a lot more flexible than what we talked in the past with. You can extend a builder with a with a subset of packages, right? This is, you can extend a builder with just generally the ability for apps to install packages at build time. That seems like a good path forward. It's a lot of flexibility. I also, because the root build pack isn't a build pack that installs a preset number of Ubuntu packages, it's often a build pack that could install any Ubuntu packages. And 99% of our use cases are installing Ubuntu packages, right? Like, maybe with the addition of, it's possible in a builder to make it so that some root build packs always run regardless of what's selected or what the user selects, right? I don't see a use case that we're not accounting for by doing this.
I guess the one use case is a community Python build pack that doesn't really belong to a stack that needs SQLite or something. It does ask the user to add 2 build packs instead of 1 build pack.
So
that's the trade-off, though.
Yes, something I mentioned in the last one that wasn't reflected in the update is I would, if needed at least, I think a feature that says some root build packs run before all other build packs no matter what would make it so the developer doesn't have to touch that interface at all, right? Either their stack has it pre-built and it works and it's performant, or their stack doesn't have it rebuilt and the apt root build pack installs the additional packages.
But how would that be different from just the build pack always passing detection?
So if you put the app build pack before all the groups and you only ever used order-based detection, it would not be different. But sometimes people explicitly specify their build packs with the -- build pack flag, and suddenly the root build pack's not running in that case. Seems like, that'd be something to account for.
In that SQLite case that Joe was talking about, as build pack author, if I have that dependency, whether it's a mixin or a thing that I want to enable, what is my interface as a build pack author to deal with that? Do I just list that as a mixin, and then if the stack happens to have the root build pack, well, I guess the problem was with mixins, you have to list them ahead of time, right?
What we talked about is making mixins a more dynamic thing that's determined in the build plan during detection, as opposed to, you could statically declare mixins on your build package, but you can also require them in the build plan so that just works out. If it's satisfied statically by the base image, then the root build pack doesn't get the requirement. If it's not satisfied by it, then the root build pack does. It installs the package and it happens seamlessly without the user's interaction. The mixin thing was Emily's idea. I should not taking credit for it. It's very clever. I like it a lot.
Does that require changes to the build plan? Or is that just some behind the scenes contract that we decide because we're implementing that root build pack?
TBD.
Okay.
I'll figure out the details there.
Yeah, that's kind of why I hadn't addressed that in the comment, is I think I still have a lot to think about there. But to Terrence's point, or to Terrence's question, whether it's Python installing SQLite or Rails build pack that installs FFmpeg when you use active storage, it can ask for the mixin, but then I think you would still need to tell your users of that build pack to manually go add something if the stack doesn't already provide it, right? Or are you thinking, well, I guess if the stack that you're using has its own apt build pack, it can see that request for that mixin and provide it. But if the stack you're using doesn't have SQLite or whatever, and also doesn't have an apt build pack, then you have to go manually do something.
And then detection probably fails because there's an unmet requirement.
Yeah. Right. That is a good way to fail, I guess.
That the user has to add this build pack inside their project TOML? Is that where it's not
I don't know if it would say that. Like it would have to say it would say that a mixin was not satisfied.
Yeah. Right, but I'm saying like what actions would he take? He would go and add it to the project TOML? Or is that where it's not allowed and he has to figure out how it works for the platform?
I think
How to create your own builder.
Yeah, like is that really the direction? Like go build your own builder to make this work?
I think there are three options, right? First of all, I think most builders are going to include a generic apt build pack or yum build pack or whatever it is that can install packages if they're comfortable with users allowing operating system packages to be installed dynamically, right? So like the open source ones for Pacato, I'm sure we would do this, right? But if they're not, right, then the user sees that, hey, the stack, no stacks or root build pack satisfied this requirement. And then the user would know I either need to satisfy this by extending my builder to include additional packages or by adding a root build pack to the builder and allowing the functionality of arbitrary apt build package installation. And if they want to restrict it to just, okay, you can install Ubuntu packages, but you can only install these Ubuntu packages, they could create a custom root build pack that just provides that small selection of mixins, right, and install that onto the builder image. So it gives them a lot of control over what's allowed there.
Would there be any indication?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, would there be any indication that the root build pack could provide mixins, or the earliest we could provide feedback to the user that the builder wasn't going to work for lack of mixin at detect?
I think the build pack that needs SQLite during detection would say, I require SQLite. During detection, if that's satisfied by the base image, then everything's good. Everything moves on, root build pack doesn't get anything, everything passes, no problem. If it's not satisfied by the base image, the root build pack, during the build phase, gets that package and installs it.
Right, I'm thinking about like our case where we're building builders pretty dynamically. And right now we're able to provide very quick feedback if they attempt to like put a build pack on a stack image that doesn't have a mixin. But in a world where all mixins doesn't get satisfied until detect time, we're not able to give the user feedback until much later that perhaps they're trying to build something on a stack that'll never work.
This doesn't get rid of static mixin requirements. You can still put mixins on a build package and still reject them based on the stack image not having them.
Why would anyone do that if sometimes you could get around that with root build packs?
Like, what if you wanted something to be able to run on you're going to know if your builder has the app build pack. It's like you could allow it, yeah, I see what you mean. You're saying that why would you put mixins on a build package statically to restrict it from being run on a smaller base image so when dynamic packages could be added? Yeah, I think that's definitely something to think about.
It seemed useful if somehow the root build pack could at least say like, I provide these mixins or I might provide mixins, so we could get some idea that the detect might work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Build packs can express mixins, so root build doesn't seem too far off the root build. A root build pack would be able to express that. We're 2 minutes over. Didn't get a chance to chat about inline build packs.
Yeah, that's fine though. I've got plenty of work to do.
Cool. Been working on pack file more, so eager to talk about the use cases.
Yeah, I think I went a very different route than previous ones, so I'll be curious what you think about it.
Yeah, that sounds fun. All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.